Hi, this is Knit Locally, and this is going to be our video tutorial, but more really a discussion point on socks and the different methods that you can use to knit socks, whether it's double points or whether it's the Flexi Flips or magic loop or 9-inch circulars. This is not going to discuss the techniques that's used in each. It's really just an overview of how each method is used, how they're different, how the patterns are going to relate to each other, and going over that. All of these methods can be used cuff down or toe up. I have cast on cuff down just for illustrative purposes, so I can give you a little demonstration of each method. Subsequent videos to this will discuss toe up versus cuff down, and then we're also going to discuss yarn types. So each different yarn, and we'll also talk about different heels, different toes, things like that. But this is really just to give us an overview of what we're going to talk about and how, if you're new to sock knitting, how do you want to make your socks. I will say the only bad way to make socks is a way that makes you unhappy. I was a sock knitter very unhappily for years, and I always said, I hate making socks, I don't like them, they're really painful. And really what it was, I didn't like the method. I didn't like the heel and I didn't like the needles. And so after playing around for a while with lots of different methods, I discovered I do actually really like making socks, just in a couple different ways. So we'll discuss those in subsequent videos, but this one is just going to kind of give us an introduction so you can see if you already like a method. Maybe you do your sleeves to your sweaters on double points or flexi flips or magic loop, and then that would be an easy transition to socks. So let's talk about double points first. Traditionally, socks were done on double points. That's actually just the way they were done. They were done, mine are all kind of wonky here. Okay, so traditionally they sort of will look like this. You can do them with 3, but most patterns are written for 4 needles, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then your 5th needle is actually just the one you knit with. These are easy because sort of your first 2 needles are going to be the ball of your foot, and then the next 2 are going to be the heel of your foot. It is really, or not the heel, the top of your foot and the bottom of your foot really is what it is. It's the first 2 and the 3 and the 4. If you're reading a pattern and it says needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4, until you get really familiar with what you're doing, you may have to keep track of them. It is easier to convert a pattern that says, for a magic loop, for instance, where it's just 1 needle, 2 needles, you're combining. So you would combine your first needle, second needle as to the top needle, and the 3rd needle, 4th needle to the bottom needle. The way these work, if you've never used double points before, personal opinion, I find them a little bit fiddly. My hands are small. I find these a little fiddly. You can get double points in different sizes. So you can get them in shorter sizes. You can get them in longer sizes. I would say for socks, you definitely want to go with the smaller, shorter needles. These are actually even a little bit too long, you can see. But what you do is the pattern will tell you, especially older patterns will say you knit needle 1. So you're just going to knit off of your needle onto your spare needle, which is why you have 4. Actually, I'm doing this in rib. So I'm just going to knit and purl, and you go around from one needle to the other. So that's how the method of that works. These are socks that you would have to do 1 at a time. There is no real method to be able to do 2 at a time socks on double points. You are limited to 1 needle at a time, or 1 sock at a time, which then gets us into that second sock syndrome, but that's up to you. Patterns will sometimes be written and say for magic loop and double point, and it will say needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4 are needle 1 and needle 2 of your magic loop. It's easier to convert those patterns I find it if I'm doing a simple pattern all over, either just rib or stockinette, double points is okay. If I am doing cables or slip stitches or something where I have to move one stitch from one needle to the other, I find double points to be a bit cumbersome. But there are a lot of people who only knit socks on double points and love them. So that's that method right there. The next method is, let's actually skip the Flexi Flips for a second and let's do the magic loop. This has gained popularity in the last several years. There are more and more sock patterns that come out with magic loop. And what it is you're using a long cord so that you can take your knitting, and you're using a front needle and a back needle. This would be, if you're using double points, needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4. This is the top of your foot, the back of your foot. So what you would do is you take out your needle, and this is why you need this long cord. It goes all the way around, and you just start knitting. Trying to get myself untangled here. And you just knit across. And in retrospect, I should have put less stitches, but what you do is essentially just knit across the needle like you would. It makes it easy because you're essentially just knitting almost a flat fabric that ends up being in the round at the end, and you're only ever holding 2 needles. I would say these are nice in the sense that I have a very long needle to hold and really grip, because my yarn is quite thin when it comes to socks. Obviously you can make socks in any weight yarn you want. Traditionally you will find that they are made in finer weight yarn. So when I get to the end here, so I'm knitting flat across, you can see why I like this one better, I think, just because there's less cumbersomeness of all of the other needles. So this drops off, I pull it through, come back to starting position. There will be another video for how to knit magic loop. So for specifics, you can look at that, but this is essentially how I knit this. This gives you the ability, if you use either a longer cord, to knit 2 at a time. So I can knit my one sock here, drop this yarn, knit my other sock, and knit straight across. And this way you get 2 socks at the same time. That's a perfect method to be able to do that. This is really the only method that this is going to allow you to do 2 at a time. So if you have that second sock syndrome, this is a good method to get rid of that. These I would recommend a 32 or 40-inch cable. You don't want it so long like a 60-inch because that gets too cumbersome, but a 40 or 32-inch cable will give you a long enough cable to pull the needle out, work your stitches, and if you want to do a second set. A hybrid of these two are these new Flexi Flips. These are new. New in the sense of, I feel like they've maybe been out about 5 or 6 years, so not so long. And these are sort of a combination, they look like this, combination of double points and magic loop. I think there were people who didn't love magic loop, didn't love double points, and they decided this was going to be, they created this, which bless them, because this is actually a nice method. So what you do is you're knitting only on 2 needles. They come in a tube like this. They come wooden, they come metal. They come in a tube like this, and you only get 3. And so what you're doing is you knit across, excuse me, like you're doing magic loop. The one thing to note is there is a sharp point and a dull point. It does not matter. It is just something to be aware of. So you don't feel like your needles are defective. So you knit across, and because you have this really nice bend, it allows you to work the yarn, work the needles, and gives you a lot of movement. It allows you to bend in a way that you would need the Flexi Flips for, or you really need that cord, or not the Flexi Flips, I'm sorry, you need the double points for, or you really need that extra cord. Because you can see my yarn for the side I'm not working sits in that curve and allows it to really bend so I can get to these points. So once we do that, and that allows you to really work the yarn in a way you wouldn't if it was just, say, 2 straight needles. So what you do is you get all the way to the end here, and you are done with this needle, and you pull it out and you start again on this one. And this is, if you have a pattern written for magic loop, you can absolutely use it for Flexi Flips with no conversion. Again, you're going to be, if you're using a double pointed pattern, you're going to have to think of this as needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4. This will be the top of your foot, bottom of your foot. I do find heels easier to do on either double points, Flexi Flips, or magic loop, because one set of the needles, either the first needle or the first and second needle, just sit off to the side while you're doing the heel. In this last method we're going to talk about, that is actually not the case. So I find these 3 methods easier to do for the heel and less cumbersome. The last method we're going to talk about, again, it's a little bit of a newer method, is these 9-inch circulars. So you can see they come like this. They're very short. They have a very short round cord and then tiny little tips. Shorter tips than you would typically find in either your double points or even your Flexi Flip needles, or, right, so just these tips are just much shorter. It sometimes causes hand cramps. I have very small hands, and I still find it a little bit cumbersome to use the 9-inch circulars, but again, it is 100% up to you. Again, the only wrong way to knit socks is a method you do not like. I will say, if I am doing a cable pattern, if I am doing a pattern that causes me to move my stitches around, if it's a circular spiral pattern, if it is a color work pattern, something I'm really having to carry over this gap, or carry over multiple gaps, the 9-inch circulars is the method I prefer. I think it's one of those things where it depends on what type of socks I'm working. These, I will show you, is essentially you're just working in a very small round. And just like you would a hat or a pair of mittens, you can use all these methods for hats and mittens, by the way. Anything in the round, if you're working a sleeve. So you're working it just the same, and it allows you to easily just work in the round the way you would work anything else. It's just these tips that tend to be very short, that sometimes can just lead to a little bit of hand cramping. So that's the only sort of drawback. When you finish, if you were doing cuff down, you find you have a lot less stitches. This is like my completed sock. You have a lot less stitches, which makes it easier to go with sort of any of these methods except for working in the round. At some point, if you are doing cuff down, you will have to probably switch to double points because you will run out of space with your needles. So you'll have to switch. I think that's it for needles. I will also say that you can also do needles on straights and just knit your socks flat, or needles. You can knit your socks flat on straight needles. You do not have to knit them in the round. There are a lot of patterns out there just for people who only prefer to knit on straight needles, and you knit your straight fabric and then seam it up using either a mattress stitch, or sometimes they'll do a decorative stitch, or they'll do a crochet together stitch. So you absolutely don't have to knit socks in the round if that makes you uncomfortable, if your hands cramp, whatever the reasoning is, too many needles, you're more than welcome to knit them flat. There's books, whole books on how to knit socks flat. So don't feel intimidated by knitting in the round in small circumference. Just knit socks that you love. So thanks for watching. Feel free to comment if you have any questions and I'll reach out and try and answer. Thanks so much.